way, this is, I think, it's not mistaken, the last school talk that we had. So, we've got 3 presenters today. So this is sort of the second in the series. We had a last event earlier this year in May, that started conversations around green infrastructure. So this is the second set. There's just so much to say. We needed to organize another amazing and some more after this. So we've got 3 presenters today. We wanted to try, we call it perspectives and green infrastructure, to start to see the scope of work that's been happening around, the green infrastructure and space solutions. So I'm not going to introduce them all as they come or as we just go on this long enough. So maybe, do you mind just standing up quickly and I'll introduce Ilham, who is a landscape architect from APG Architects. She'll be presenting first about the standard Mclachlan village, and then Mclachlan is a landscape architect and home designer. She also teaches in our program and works with grade 1. She's currently doing finishing off her PhD. Connected with the children who like stop talking. There is some background, her long credentials. And also really grateful to have Lauren Grootboom here. She's currently doing her Future Water Institute ICCT as well, and we'll be talking to some of her work. And the dining woman has slowly using infrastructure. So yes, thank you for people being here. We'll have a bit of a whirlwind run through the presentations, and then hopefully we'll have some time for some dialogue and questions. Yeah, I think, I'm sorry, we think the click is not going to work till this happens. So
that's fine. All right, thank you so much. So today I'm speaking about the Sunder Village Wetland Park. It was a project commissioned and thought through from or by the city of Cape Town. A Sunder Village, just to locate you, is in the Western Cape. It is quite close to Strand along the False Bay coast and is positioned along the N2 highway on your way to Solaris Pass and onwards to Caledon. So to dive into this journey of the Sunder Village Wetland Park, we start in 2014. The project spanned a number of years, but in 2014, the City of Cape Town's Environmental Management Department identified a Sunder Village as a site ready for enhancement. The goal was to transform it into a sustainable parkland that was functional. The Environmental Management Department collaborated with the Project Management, Design and Development Facilitation Department to tackle stormwater management challenges at the same time. It was critical not only for the site itself, but also for the larger upstream catchment area. In 2015, quite significant community engagement occurred. The EMD, or Environmental Management Department, with the then appointed design consultants, hosted stakeholder engagement workshops. And those workshops were aimed at gaining community insights to ensure that the project reflected the community's needs, but also respected the physical constraints on the site. In 2017, the project was ready to move forward, and through a tender process, plans were set in motion to appoint a new team to take the whole project forward. By 2019, our team was appointed, and by 2023, the project was completed and implemented. So it took quite a while. The site is outlined in that map in red. At the top, you see the N2, and it's framed by, to the west, the Asler Business Development Park, and on the right side, the Christmas Tinto Primary School, and there's a high school next to that as well. That band of area is or was a wetland at one point. To the south is Asanda village, which is residential. So the vision for the site was brought together by the city and the community. And the intention was to have an integrated ecologically restored stormwater management and community amenity that was combined into a single sustainable landscape initiative. The goal set through those community workshops was to have a rehabilitated wetland system, which focused on enhancing the ecological health of the area. It was to have an integrated stormwater management system that could manage runoff from upstream, the site itself, and downstream areas. It was also about formalizing a non-motorized transport route to ensure safe paths for pedestrians and cyclists and connecting them through the open space. The project included, or was meant to include, high quality landscape upgrades to improve the usability of the park, but also its aesthetics and long-term sustainability. Finally, the park was to feature multi-use recreational and play areas designed to foster community engagement and providing everyone with a place to enjoy the outdoors. Okay, so some history on the stormwater concerns. The site is located within the Sept River catchment. The river is a series, or is now a series, of artificial channels and attenuation ponds, which have been altered as development progressed in the area. Over time, there was significant reduction in wetland areas as those developments occurred, which affected the functioning of the stormwater system. So this map was part of a stormwater management report that was done quite early on in the project's history. But yeah, on the map in the orange block, we indicate the site's location. And at the site, there's a channel system that has culverts that daylight into the site. During the project and earlier in the process, a freshwater report was conducted, and that report also highlighted the impact of development around the site, impacting on the loss of the wetlands, but also in changes in the stormwater design, and highlighted the need to improve the culvert's capacity onto the site. It was classified as a transformed wetland with moderate importance, but also noted that the surrounding wetlands was quite well vegetated and in a good condition and had indigenous wetland species. So the image there was taken from the freshwater report and shows the wetland edges in blue. At the bottom of the site, there was a high quality seasonally inundated wetland pond. It was the deepest portion of the site. The recommendations was to minimize the footprint of structures on the wetland, to rehabilitate the wetland margins, to remove all livestock, and there was livestock on that site, clearing of all litter and waste, and the fill that you can see in the center of the site there as well. So the site was utilized as a pedestrian route, and there was movement in north-south direction from the end to into the park, as well as east-west, connecting pedestrians to the main main roads. Those were essential for connectivity, but became waterlogged in the winter months. And the community would then place stepping stones to be able to cross from the one end to the other. The area was also utilized for dumping waste, and cars were able to access from those side roads and bring in rubble waste, which also contributed to those culverts being blocked up. That water accumulation further impacted pedestrian routes and infrastructure, and addressing those concerns became quite key. The area was also used as a play area by the community, and one of the goals was to improve the design to enhance that social interaction. Oh, before I just go back, the bottom left, the bottom right-hand picture just shows that kraal that was located in the center of the site, and goats were kept there and allowed to graze freely. That was one of the items that was needing to move to create a community space. So our design approach was to conserve and protect as much of the wetland system as possible. And in doing that, having a light touch on the wetland. We tried to retain as much of it as possible, in particular the pond area at the bottom, the southern end. Now, also fulfilling the community's request was a priority, and the design aimed to balance conservation of the wetlands with the community needs by providing recreational and educational facilities. And as you can imagine, this space had potential for outdoor learning, not only through signage, but also through spaces that could educate students, and it was very well located next to two schools, on how wetlands function. Accessibility and safety was also key, and which included safe routes, so providing safe routes which were well lit, paved, and also safe passage in the winter months when the water levels rose. Finally, another goal was to enhance the imageability of the site with iconic elements, like mounds, which would not only enrich the community's experience of the space, but also could be used to highlight the flora and fauna unique to river systems. So the little map in green shows the wetland portion. The blue arrow shows where the culverts or inlets daylight onto the site from the N2 side as well as from Skoji Street side. In fact, that culvert daylights at Mbele Street. And then at the yellow arrows indicate where pedestrians were accessing the site, and that is all the way around. To the right, we have Christmas Tinto School, it's a primary school, and right in front of that school was a food garden that was formalized and fed, used by the school. On the opposite side of Isikola Street, there was quite a lot of informal business happening, people creating timber structures and selling it there as a market space. The little pink squares where the kraal was and the goats were kept, and the orange just indicates the desire lines across the site where people were using to cross from the north to the south and east to west. So the concept design. One of the key factors or key considerations was to eliminate any unsafe routes. And there were informal routes along the business park, which was a dead zone, and people were being robbed along there. So access of that route was discouraged. We had tried to facilitate pedestrian access across the site and eliminate vehicular access onto the site. What was planned was a secondary route through the wetlands, but that was not carried through into the final design. The main route, crossing east-west, was planned as a culvert, a raised culvert structure, which allowed water to flow through from the north into the wetland pond in the south. Playing community was also important. The play area was planned to accommodate equipment for various user ages. And in that diagram, you can see we had intended to install equipment, but that design had changed with the final implementation, mainly due to maintenance. Along the southern edge, there was quite a lot of encroachment with the houses, but the community also did engage in urban agriculture with some permeable fencing, and that connection was planned to be maintained. There was an informal walkway around the bottom edge, which was really, really, really narrow. And part of the design was to formalize that, widen it a bit to make it safer. At the northern end, the N2, which was quite an important entrance, well-used entrance, was opened up and broadened, and the main pedestrian route along the site was hardened as close as possible to the existing school. The interventions were planned to be on the highest portions of the site. Seating was planned to be accommodated, and in the center, initially we had thought to include an amphitheater type of space that could be used as an outdoor classroom, but this was later shifted down on the site. In the center, if you see that brown square above the Eskom servitude, a multi-purpose court was planned for sport, but also with quite a lot of seating for other market activities. So the intention was also to promote informal trade in the area. All of those entrances, as I said, were being accessed by cars initially, and a series of really heavy bollards and bollard seating was planned for the pedestrian routes to try and limit vehicle access onto the site. So what was implemented? The north-south pedestrian and cycling route, which led from the N2 down along the school towards a multi-purpose court and the associated seating. The play mound was constructed without all of the equipment, although there is a slide, but the later intention was for the mound structures to be quite hard-wearing and more geared to imaginative play. The amphitheater was then shifted down as well, which could be used for community events as well as the school. Quite an important intervention was that bridge, which allowed safe access across the site and for the water to flow down into the lower pond. The pedestrian access points from Bailey Street, Zulu Drive, Isikola Street were paved and envisioned as forecourts to the wetland park space. So I just have some photographs of those spaces in use. So that's the multi-purpose court looking towards Isikola Street and the play mound in the background. That's looking in the opposite direction towards the N2 and at the school. So there, along the pedestrian route, you can see some planting along those edges and seats. Those were the very heavy mass concrete bollard seats provided not only for for rest, but also at the forecourt spaces. Yeah. Thank you. Maybe I should try use this. If you want to look at which one, just arrows.
Right. Right. This is the positioning architecturally where I can't actually see what I'm talking to. Anyway, okay, I'll focus on this. I know, but then I feel that I've got my crib notes here, the things that I told the students never to use. Right, so we're doing another aspect. Can everybody hear me? Those at the back. Jonathan? Okay, blue-green infrastructure. This is about an aspect of blue-green infrastructure, which is the rethinking of Cape Town's monofunctional stormwater ponds. And it's part of the Pathways to Water Resilient South African Cities research project, or PAWS, which is a transdisciplinary collaboration between the University of Cape Town's Future Water Institute, the University of Copenhagen, Denmark, all under funding from Danida under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark. And Lauren was helping out on this as well. And Keke's not here, is it? Okay. All right, 3 parts. There's the introduction, the research project study site, and observations thereof. So the context for this was the severe drought. The context for the PAWS project itself was the severe drought that impacted the region 2015 to 2018. And the city of Cape Town published a water strategy roadmap in 2019, 2020, I think, that outlined its plans to improve water resilience for the city. And this included diversifying its water resources. Now, if you look at the image on the left, you'll see the outline of the Cape Flats Aquifer. That's one potential aspect of the, that's one potential water resource. Now, above the aquifer are numerous stormwater ponds. So these stormwater ponds are actually monofunctional engineered infrastructure. They're meant to provide protection. They're engineered to provide protection for the Cape Flats urban areas. So the initial premise of the PAWS research project was very much about examining the technical potential of these existing monofunctional stormwater ponds and their potential contribution to managed aquifer recharge. So managed aquifer recharge, basically, instead of the stormwater flowing out directly to sea, as it currently does, stormwater would instead be intercepted to infiltrate down into the ground, using nature-based solutions, so basically for future abstraction via managed aquifer recharge. So to this end, the idea was to look at transitioning these stormwater ponds into blue-green infrastructure. It's helpful to look at the definition of blue-green infrastructure. So it's O'Donnell is one of the authors. He and his co-authors she and her co-authors look at blue-green infrastructure as an interconnected network of landscape components, natural and designed, that includes open green spaces and water bodies that provide multiple functions. You see that emphasis on multiple functions rather than monofunctional. But important in this is the blue in blue-green infrastructure. So it's specifically designed to turn blue or bluer during rainfall events in relation to storm water and reducing flood risk. So we get much of the literature refers to the multifunctional benefits of blue-green infrastructure. There's a lot of engineering literature that talks about multifunctional benefits of blue-green infrastructure. So flood prevention, heat mitigation, aquifer recharge, biodiversity enhancement. But what would it actually mean to transition these stormwater ponds across the Cape Flats into blue-green infrastructure? So while they're called ponds, they're not inundated the whole time. So they're only inundated during storm events. So the rest of the time, these are basically grass-covered basins. Some of these ponds are perceived as vacant, neglected land. They're prone to dumping. Ilham referred to that already. They're littered and prone to dumping. Those seem to be general problems that we have. And the other ponds have also been occupied with informal housing. This is one example, impacting not only the functionality of the stormwater system, but also endangering lives. So the city of Cape Town has zoned these as public open space and for environmental conservation. They're also maintained biannually, so despite it being environmental conservation potential, they're also mowed biannually and also just general litter removal. So it's an important aspect of landscape. So looking at the research project study site itself, so you see the site, the red button or the red square. So it's in Fulham Road in Mitchell's Plain, if anybody knows the area, Rondaflay. The site was selected together with the City of Cape Town's catchment, stormwater and river management, and also with the groundwater consultant. And yeah, I think you can see, so those are the light green, you'll see those sort of like light green stormwater pond dots. So each of those is attached to a main stormwater line, and those stormwater lines all discharge out into False Bay. There's other stormwater ponds above this. We're just focusing on this particular site. So this was the site in April 2019. So you can see there's single-story residential neighborhood. There's a school right next to it on the left, and another school further there, in just a few kilometers, or a few meters away, the other side. 100 meters away, not a few meters. Okay. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, there we go. So in late 2021, so this is during the COVID pandemic, residents were actually recruited as part of this pause projects to help in the construction of an experiment, basically to determine the feasibility of stormwater infiltration using nature-based solutions. So the nature-based solutions are basically the sandbag wall. What was interesting during this, well, after when we were talking to some of the resident workers, was that from seeing that space as empty, they started, because they were working on the space, they started to see all sorts of creatures in the course of their work. And they started to now see it as part of nature instead of that empty space. A planting day was also held with Denisha Anant, an environmental activist from Princess Flay, and this really turned out to be a catalyst. One of the key narratives that came about from interviews was the notion of the wetland being alive. This resulted in some of the residents actually starting to refer to it as a living thing, and even starting to protect the pond, that zone itself in red, and also to protect it from city mowing by the city contractors. Just that pond, the rest of it always got mowed. So whilst the residents protected the pond, what we ended up getting was this sort of grow, don't mow, and within it, a biodiverse landscape. We started seeing a whole lot of plants, flowers, especially September. You get beautiful flowers coming out in March. And one of them was also identified as a critically endangered plant by Dr. Caitlin von Witt from Famble's Life. And I thought, just to add here, we often talk about, certainly in doing research, that local residents are actors who possess agency. But it's also important to note that the landscape itself seems to have agency, and it can influence. So because it's talked about as a living thing, people then engage with it to protect it. So that relational aspect, relational consideration. In July 2023, with the assistance of Famble's Life, nonprofit organization, as well as local residents, we did further planting with locally indigenous Cape Flat students Strandveld. And so it was next to the school, just in a portion of it. And in July, in 2024, we also used local labor to construct both a V-notch. This is very engineering of a V-notch weir. And then also, so that was part of a water flow experiment. Because remember, I said this was transdisciplinary collaboration. And then also the installation of stepping stone bollards. This is with Keke. I think some of you know Keke. Lauren, anyway, let me move. Sorry, before I go off on a complete tangent. But the bollards were actually put there because we suspect it was a City of Cape Town appointed contractor, but they decided they were going to mow part of the wetland. So we thought we'd see if there was any relational considerations that would evolve if we put in bollards. So the observations that followed, and so we talk about in academic literature, we recognize the multifunctionality of blue-green infrastructure. So flood protection, heat mitigation, biodiversity enhancement, and we talk about it in our designs at length. But the thing is how to make it actually tangible, relevant, and even visible to people who live in the proximity of this, what we call blue-green infrastructure. So in a paper by Abdul Malik Simone, he talks about people as infrastructure in urbanized Joburg. Could we apply the same conceptual thinking to blue-green infrastructure, recognizing people as part of infrastructure in terms of relational considerations? So for instance, here we've got Lauren and Peg here as well, at the study site with the Green Autonomy Ambassadors, who are an NPO from Kales River, who are interested in doing a similar approach in Kales River. Yes, River, sorry. Yes, River, thank you. And then on the right, you'll see one of the City of Cape Town officials from Biodiversity Branch is very interested, very passionate about fynbos, and he gave a talk and a site visit for some of the local residents looking at fynbos and its propagation, harvesting seeds and things like that. Another aspect of the peopling of blue-green infrastructure, consider in a paper by Joan Nassau, she talks about the role of appearance and the need for cues to care. Am I being considering people as part of blue-green infrastructure? We could actually start to see the relational role of landscape elements actually functioning as cues to engage. With these varying from a simple rock climb path, you can see the students from the neighboring school just walking along that path. I mean, it's bizarre. We actually got excited about this, seeing the people following paths around the site. Then we've also got the weir that was incorporated as part of an engineering element, but it was also became a bridge, as well as creating a habitat that's of interest to local children. The bollards installed to protect the wetland zone also provide stepping stone paths around that wetland zone. And we've seen local school children and local residents using these elements. So recognizing people as part of blue-green infrastructure could provide relational opportunities for building on knowledge systems, such as citizen science, monitoring of water quality, biodiversity, what have you. And over here, you can see in the main picture, there's a Guardians of the Pond event that Lauren and KK worked hard on. This was with the children from the school kids from the neighboring school with grade 8. It was actually the brainchild of the school principal of this. The school principal had actually seen us at the stormwater pond, and once she understood the purpose of the research work, and she saw the purpose of the pond, she saw this as a potential outdoor classroom. So that relational, so learning about this thing and building on knowledge systems, seeing how it could be used for herself. You mentioned education as well. So it also provides relational opportunities for broader network setups with other NPOs. We're talking to the City of Cape Town, MAR, BGI, in terms of those. And then we've got stormwater ponds. I think this is important to note. Look, the stormwater ponds, context and situation matter. So they could function not only as integral elements of the city's drainage system, as well as civic assets, but these are key. It's key to understand the context in which these occur. You just can't consider blue-green infrastructure in isolation. How does it fit into its surroundings? So, for instance, you've got stormwater ponds might be located as in the study site where it's embedded in a neighborhood. It's next to a school, or it's at next to a busy shopping center. So those different blue-green infrastructure relationships need to be considered. And in considering the transition of these monofunctional stormwater ponds potentially into blue-green infrastructure, there's a recognition of the need for innovative approaches that Henrik Ernsten talks about. He talks about a new way of knowing and being in relation to these spaces at Bosphorus Road, for instance. And in the context of a paper by Fenter and his co-authors, where they remark on the persisting, they actually did some spatial mapping, and they determined the persistence of what they call green apartheid that continues across the Cape Town's Cape Flats. Furthermore, we recognize that with decreasing biodiversity, you have reduced ecological functionality, reduced ecosystem services. And I thought to include this as well. Daily Maverick last year had a quote from Councillor Eddie Andrews, the deputy mayor, who said the Cape Flats is now very urbanized and nature reserves are often the only open spaces mitigating future climate change and providing ecosystem services. But in the context of the work that we've been doing on this pause research project, certainly for the particular site itself and its surroundings, it does seem to be that there is potential if we can start to rethink these monofunctional stormwater ponds as a sort of more multifunctional, multi-purpose blue-green infrastructure. Okay, thank you.
Hi everyone. I must say Julia is a tough act to follow, but I'll try. So my name is Lauren Grootboom, as Christina said. I am doing my PhD. I'm based at Future Water, which is in civil engineering. So my PhD is in civil engineering. As a disclaimer, I am not a civil engineer. I am a social scientist. I just found myself there. I don't know how. Same way I found myself here in a room full of landscape architects where I'm neither of that. So I'll take you through a bit of what Julia spoke about, the projects that I've worked on, and also maybe how that fed into my PhD. As another disclaimer, I just arrived. I just started doing it this year. So please be kind to my ideas. So the work that I do exists in the context of this idea called the urban river syndrome, which is all caused by the influx or heightened nature of climate change. So we all know what climate change is. It's basically the changing nature of what's happening in the world around the climate and the ecosystems. And what happens in the context of climate change, more so in what I contextualize as township or impoverished spaces, is that when it rains, it pours. As Julia mentioned, that there are stormwater ponds that are based in the Cape Flats. It's about 800 stormwater ponds in Cape Town alone, and most of them actually sit in the context of the Cape Flats. So what happens then is that when it rains, the rain increases more, the flooding increases more. So what happens to the lives and the lived experiences of those people? Again, I'm a social scientist, so I'll always think about people before I think about anything else. So my idea or my thinking is actually centering people in those systems so that we can actually have fundamental change and not contribute to this idea in the context of spatial segregation being so rife in Cape Town. We recognize that a lot of the inequalities are based in apartheid legislature and colonial ideas that have been transferred into the current context that we live in right now. So poor water quality, leakages, fragmented institutions, quality of life, and poverty. When climate change is exacerbated, these things are further exacerbated in informal spaces, which I don't see as informal. I see them as unplanned settlements rather than informal spaces. So I'll speak a bit through that today as well. What did I do? Sorry. There we go. So I look at nature-based solutions as a form of biomimicry. So how I see nature-based solutions is basically nature or us doing with nature what nature has always done with itself. I am very not against gray infrastructure, which the engineers really don't like when I say that, but I think we can use nature-based solutions as a more contextual example or more contextual way of development and infrastructure in a South African context. It's more applicable to the context, it's less harming to the environment, it's less harming to the people, and more importantly, it relies on the knowledge that people have had for eons, right? And people that are indigenous to the space. So I use people's knowledge as a form of indigenous, local, and traditional knowledge. And I use that to sort of mitigate the risk or mitigate this movement towards more gray infrastructure. So this is an example of a water sensitive design. Cape Town is a water sensitive city, or it's trying to move towards this idea of having a water sensitive city. So what would that look like? That would look like green buildings and roofs, for example. The idea is that nature-based solutions or nature-based solutions as blue-green infrastructure have multifunctional benefits as is. So it's a beautiful green roof, but it also permeates the building. It also allows for cooling inside the building. So it's more benefit than just one, which is what a lot of my work looks at. Having more waterway naturalization. So you'll see this happening a lot in the city of Cape Town as well. They're trying to move past this fundamentalizing of very hard gray infrastructure to insert pockets of greenness or pockets of blueness in the city. I went to the Netherlands a few months ago, and there too, they're doing that now. They've realized that colonialism did not contribute that much and grayness needs to be uprooted. So now they are trying to move towards what we're doing here. So they're trying to green up the space. You'll find a lot of city spaces, pockets of greenness, again, for its multifunctional benefits. And a lot of the things that I mentioned here, managed aquifer recharge. Julia also mentioned that we did that at our pond as well. And you saw the multifunctional ability that green manufactured aquifer recharge has, right? It's not only a space or a way to it's not just a way to retrofit the stormwater pond, but it also provides multifunctional benefits for the community, which again lies at the center of the work that I do. So yeah, I'll look at water recycling very briefly when I go into the site-specific context that I look at. So what is water security and water resilience? So basically what I like to do, or what I look at, is the relationships that people have with their spaces. My undergrad and my master's, I both majored in political science. For my master's, I looked at transitional justice. So what was transferred from the colonial and apartheid system into the current democratic state that we look at now, and how the political systems have detached people from their spaces. We're all aware of forced removals that happened between the 1950s and the 60s. A lot of those people were taken out of spaces like your boekamps, and they were placed in the Cape Flats, right? With the idea that they're not supposed to be attached to their space. So what happens now is that when you go into communities such as township communities, people don't have a connection to their space because the political system detached people from their space. The idea is that don't get too attached because you might be moved at any point in time, right? So those are things that have been intergenerationally transferred down, including how we are connected to nature. The gag is that we have always been those people that have been connected to nature. So the system, if you look at a political system, it doesn't only detach you from yourself, but it also detaches you from nature. And detaching the indigenous people of the land from the nature itself detaches them from their ways of being and therefore their ways of thinking. So hopefully my PhD gets to put all these ideas together. Again, I just arrived, so please be kind to me. But I look at the knowledge systems, the integration of knowledge, as you saw on the first slide, urban migration, or the increasing people population in urban context does create a problem for the capacity that we have. But I tend to see that as a plus. I see people as, when they migrate from rural spaces to urban spaces, they migrate with the knowledge that they come with from the rural spaces as well. So I not capitalize, but I want to fundamentalize that knowledge system, or those knowledges that people migrate with from urban spaces into, from rural spaces into urban spaces, because most of them are probably in these informal spaces that we see, or these township spaces that we see. As a disclaimer, again, I am also from a township, so I'll always advocate for people thinking and being from township spaces. Whew, you guys are making me nervous. So what is IKS? Very briefly, I'm not going to go through everything on there, but it's the intricate system of networks and beliefs that we have, how we've historically and indigenously engaged with the land. I think Julia also mentioned this. If you see the land as a living thing, then you start having a different relationship with the land. We have always seen the land as a living thing. We have always seen the water and spoken to the land and spoken to the water as a living thing, because we recognize recognize that it's a reciprocal relationship. If I take, and I overconsume, the land will refuse to give back to me the way that it's supposed to, which is what colonialism and grey infrastructure sort of fundamentalizes. It's taken too much, now it's trying to give back, but it's giving back the wrong way. That's sort of colloquially blocking the blessings of coming the other way, right? So I'm hoping that if we use IKS, or if we use people's local knowledge that they've migrated with, and we don't see it as, oh, you're filling up the city center, you're taking all our spaces, and we see those people as people that have migrated with knowledge on the land, migrated with knowledge on the water, migrated with relationships to the land, then I think that can help us contribute to not only having more BGI or blue green infrastructure, but moving more towards a more reciprocal relationship with nature, so that nature can actually start giving us what we need instead of climate change. Sorry. So again, like I mentioned, I see people as custodians of knowledge, of their spaces, of nature, of relationships. I grew up in a township, and before that, I'm from the Eastern Cape, a very small town. My whole life has been matriarchal. The knowledge that exists within my family has been transferred down through women, knowledge on plants, knowledge on water, knowledge on our ancestors, knowledge on how to speak to water, knowledge on how to use the plants to heal yourself. All of those things have been transferred down through my grandmother, through my great-grandmother, and they've been maintained in my family like that. I always make this joke where I say, I never got to go to the hospital when I was a kid, even though I was really sick. One, we were too poor, but my granny would just cook something green up. The next day, I am so good. I'd be the healthiest kid in school. And those are things that we've always fundamentalized at home, even though my mom loves cosmopolitan Cape Town, and she moved here, and by virtue of that, we're into the education system or whatever. But still at home, if I get sick, the first thing that she would suggest is for me to use some kind of indigenous medicine or some kind of plant to heal me. So that's the same way that I see blue-green infrastructure and nature-based solutions, right? We are aware that the medical system exists. We know that we need that for certain benefits, but we know that real healing comes from the plants. It comes from the land. It comes from our relationships with the plants and the land. And if we continue to take away from that, we won't have our healing, and we won't have our relationships and our abilities to speak to the land the way that we have. So I specifically show you these pictures because it's a rural and a urban context. So we see that when there's crisis around water, when there's crisis around food security, women tend to be the people that sort of rally together and make things happen. I'm from Gwalanga, which is like right down the road. And every time there's a problem around water, my mom will call me, she'll be like, City of Cape Town is not going to come. They don't come into our communities because they see it as informal, right? Or they see it as too dangerous. They can't go and provide us with resources that we need and we're supposed to get from them. So what my mom does, she'll rally a few women together. By the end of the day, the problem is sorted out around water, either a leaking tap, someone doesn't have access to water, but women come together and make those things happen. And that is a knowledge system that has been transferred from the rural areas that they now do, even in Cape Town context or in an urban context right now. So this is my thinking and my reasoning. I am a gender specialist. So for my honors, I've been specializing in gender. More so because under the apartheid system, Black women were considered perpetual minors. So they were considered children for the rest of their lives. They couldn't have access to land. They couldn't own anything. They couldn't think for themselves. They weren't seen as people. They were just seen as placeholders that existed. So I look at that disenfranchisement or that marginalization of Black women and how that's been transferred. And I sort of try to write into that vacuum that exists because I know the power that exists in that. Again, I come from a matriarchal household. So for me, the only thing that I've seen them is in a position of strength. I mean, the knowledge, the healing. I've seen my great-grandmother bringing people back to life just by giving them medicine, right, that she's used to, that she knows. So those knowledge systems I hope to use in a water context. I always say that I am, for context, my mom is Xhosa, my father is colored, but I was raised by my mother. So I follow my Xhosa side from my mother's side, and I follow my Khoi side from my father's side because he's Khoi and classified colored under apartheid. So I have all these indigenous systems that exist within me. So it's impossible for me to ignore them because they somehow keep ringing and bringing me back to where I'm supposed to be. I think that's why I've been able to do this a lot academically and move in and out of spaces. So yeah, I think I've said a lot about that now. So the work that we do, sorry, I don't know why it's doing that. Oh, there we go, animated. So the work that we do a lot exists within the community. As Julia said, I was on the pause project. I remember at the time when I started, I was the only social scientist in a room with a bunch of engineers. And every time I said something, nobody would really listen to what I was saying because they're like, oh, you're doing the soft work. You're not doing the real work. But every single project gets implemented into a space, into a society with a functional history, with a functional social system, with social capital, with cultural capital that has been existing for years. So the reason why these engineering interventions or gray infrastructure hasn't worked in those spaces because nobody consulted the people. Nobody asked that if I put a bench here, for example, the site that we have in Mitchell's Plain, the poor site, we initially added benches because we're like, oh, okay, it's a multifunctional space. People want to sit down. The community called us like, come and fetch these benches because you are bringing gangsters here. These kids are doing lawless things at this site because you've added these benches, and we had to go back and remove the benches, right? Because if it doesn't benefit the community, then what are we doing it for? If you are going to keep on regurgitating the same infrastructure and the same things, I think engineers love that red book. They just do the same thing that they've been told through the red book, same thing, and it's not working. It's not working because it's not contextual. It's based on a Eurocentric system that does not work in an African context. So we need to go and consult people. One thing I really love that we do in our engagements, in our workshops, and I'm always there yapping my life away, is that we speak to people. We ask people, what are your relationships with water? People have different relationships with water. I am a woman, but I'm also a Xhosa woman. So culturally, I can't do anything without water. All of the customs and traditions that we do need water. As a woman, I need water, right? And what made me look at the gendered aspects of water was because of the day zero context, right? How in township spaces we had to walk far places to go and get water, just the 50 liters a day. Most of the time it's women that have to do that. So you have to negotiate the time that you go, you have to negotiate your safety everywhere you go, right? So there's definitely a gendered aspect to water. And that's why I was like, okay, it's important for me to look at this. But sorry, I can talk about this forever. I was kind of dry. So these are the two sites that I'm going to speak about very, very briefly in like 2 minutes. The first site is the Mitchell's Plain site that Julia was speaking about and how we retrofitted the stormwater pond there. The second site is the water hub, which is based in Franschhoek. The water hub, I'll explain about it a bit more, but it's basically like a living lab that was created at the bottom of the river. So the Siebel River runs all the way from the mountain through this unplanned settlement all the way down through the water hub. So the water hub uses nature-based solutions to sort of purify the water because it comes like as gray water coming down from the community. Then they purify the water in order for it to go back into the river or the waterway that goes into Stellenbosch. I think it also goes into the Kuilsrivier, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, and they have a lot of other blue-green infrastructure things that they do there. Something else that I saw that they do in the Netherlands, which I thought was really, really cool as a nature-based solution. So the Netherlands is below sea level. So they always have floods or historically have floods. So what they did instead of canalizing the space with gray infrastructure, they added a berm, which is basically just sand, and then they planted grass on top of the berm. So it keeps the water out. And then the cutest thing that they did is that they would use the sheep to graze the land or to graze the grass when it gets like too big. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so circular economy. I love it. So basically they do that at the water hub too. There's like a canalized berm. It acts as an amphitheater as well. So most of the time people from the community would come, they would look at they would be like, oh, this is what we do here. How can this be upscaled or put further up into the river, which is a project I'm working on now for my PhD as well, is basically to have more nature-based solutions so that the water is not as gray or as black when it comes into the water hub. And again, very briefly, this is our multifunctional pond that Julia has spoken about, so I don't need to go into detail. But the mural that you see at the back, that was a collaborative effort between the community as well. Again, based on people's relationships with water, how they've historically interacted with water. Another thing I really love that we did is we planted indigenous plants at the site because of their multifunctional benefits. So there's a lot of mpepo, which I'm sure some people use, I love, which is basically incense that you burn. A lot of the fynbos, so the plants that are indigenous, actually have multifunctional benefits. You can either heal from them, you can drink them to feel better, or you can eat them and they can sustain you for long periods of time. So we were conscious of those things as well when we did that. And then this is the settlement just upstream, and then the water comes down basically all the way into the water hub. One thing I really am trying to do now in my time that I'm there for the next 2 months is to understand how women have used their indigenous knowledge basically to work against what they've been given, because people are basically just dumped in these unplanned settlements, and the idea is don't go back in there, don't go look to see what's happening. So they definitely have strategies that they do to combat the effects of climate change. And yeah, this is very long, but I think I've said everything this far. But yeah, wish me luck in this PhD journey. That's what I'll say.
Provides any resources, even people or maybe some funding, it gets to the point where the community needs extra assistance to maintain water resources, because it seems like everyone in the community is providing their work to maintain the ecosystem. And I mean, sure, sometimes must be a lot of work. I mean, floods or if there's weeds or something, or if the wall needs to be painted or something, is always there's the entire expectation on the community that they should provide all of the work. Do you want me to talk about it? Okay. It seems just the things that bring to you. Okay. I suppose in my experience with the city, this is my personal experience, not my academic experience. Should have translated. In my personal experience with the city, especially because the space has been marginalized. So, as you know, with spatial segregation in Cape Town, Black and colored people sort of live on the periphery. And that was something that was implemented during apartheid, it took us longer to get to town for it to be more taxing to be a citizen in the city. So because of that, those things have definitely not been left at the wayside, like because we live in a democracy now. So the city very rarely engages with these spaces. I mean, they deem them as informal spaces. So if the space is informal, then you don't see any need to go and formalize the space because it's seen as a sort of like a degenerate space, I would say. However, in an academic context, the city tends to be quite present, right? We have stormwater, I think Andrew's from stormwater. We have a lot of characters, but I would say characters. We have a lot of characters from the city that tend to come for our project. They tend to be involved, they tend to want to know the academic aspects behind it, or the project-related aspects behind it. But I did the policy review for our project, and it was so difficult to locate our project in the policy that I literally had to change the jargon or change the language and code it to that policy in order for me to be able to place our project in that. So it's always like, oh no, you don't belong to stormwater, you belong to parks, or you don't belong to parks, you belong to this one. So there's a lot of push and pull with any government space or any government entity that they don't want to get involved with. So it's a very difficult question to respond to. Politically and legally, they're supposed to do those things, but we do know, as per the Constitution, what exists in theory does not exist in practice. That's not responding to you, but
Responding to Lauren, what Lauren said, because also what she's alluding to is that the city maintains, so it's the maintenance of a stormwater pond. That's all. It's just mow it and remove all the litter so that you don't, so it's for flood protection. So that's its current role. It's just to make sure that it protects people from flooding. which means that you're going to have stormwater management guys coming biannually to just before and after the rain season. And then the other thing that you get into is, this is my zone that I look after. Then another person said, okay, this is my zone. I'm not touching your zone, and you don't touch my zone. It's this whole, I'm still trying to figure out at a stormwater department who looks after which part, because they're all very complicated. Whereas if you could might be start to change it and say it's a blue-green infrastructure, and you had blue-green infrastructure depots, then might be it would be, because at the moment it's everything is focused on flood protection.
I did meet someone from the city a few weeks ago, and we had such a robust conversation. I think she was scared of me. So I asked, like, so where is that? Where does that sit, right? That functionality, because everybody's going to push you this here, there, and say that this doesn't belong to me. And she was like, no, actually, she's the one starting a new sort of department where everything that is seen as not fitting in fits in there. Right, but this was also from a very One Health perspective to say we recognize that these things have multifunctional effects or externalities. So we have to have space that speaks to all these externalities, that it goes into economic, social, or goes into legal, or goes into all of those contexts. But whether it will be executed, I mean, it is a government exercise. Yeah. Another question.
Yeah, I think the question for like question for comments and stuff, and it's with the projects with schools and for schools, which are like kind of iconic element of agriculture the infrastructure part. And it seems like a link between all of them is also this infrastructure, which also deal with the design. And also between much of the history of the indigenous culture and of the resource of people coming in, where a lot of it seems to be common through this very experiential learning and how biodiversity activates that. And so then that kind of resource then, the indigenous knowledge comes to the fore as a resource, as an asset, rather than like, so it's perception, value, then change shifts when it comes to contribution, and within that identity and basically we'll start to create this community that also have roles between each other. And so, yeah, I was just wondering also with the aspect of the schools and the youth and their engagement with the, in terms of like gender-based roles where there's opportunity there. I mean, I saw the link between like possibly this opportunity, not just for the verbal indigenous spiritual connection, but also the agricultural one. And then what I was interested in also was the prevention of role as well as, and then also possibly like does design play a role in that kind of iconic element that they have, which is where design can kind of create a sense of not just identity, but of a belonging or of opportunity where people can start to relate to space as a central space, also the place that they can think to the density, whether it's actually like a home or a sculpture object or something that marks that even colonizes or creates space, claims space back, that's maybe happens within the community. So it's about, I think, yeah, just where reclamation and experiential learning experiences, what the opportunities are there, and then sometimes, and then also just once through the more practical stuff in terms of birds and stuff, in terms of dumping or race, because you see with the urban design is like lots of these canals and walkways where women and communities are getting together and the guys in the blocks are just dump everything. So it doesn't help to create if it isn't protected. So just to see if there's any things that you can't and the possible role of design within. So that's a lot, but like maybe just like changing what the technical question. Sorry, I was on the emails. Sorry, yeah. Maybe just from our experience in the space in Sept was very nice with this project that we had worked at and started
you had in that project quite a lot of shopping. So what they had included was based on what we didn't think to and the kinds of spaces that would work for them. Of course, not all of it. This is the some other or the reason that they wanted project was given to all of the specifically. But having a certain idea, all of that, all of those ideas will be chopped. And we normally sign the children holding hands, which is part of the signage, that all came from the and having that kind of ownership of one of them. So it's we did not solve the problem. We support that space now. Even though through the project they have done spaces. But this project and other projects we tried within vision and see what in our project we bought off the team that's one. But we can. So we tried to look at those balls in the one the Western movement, you have this temporary things balls because they were like giving this castle built how they get through. Or maybe it's called because I guess before we can get to the environmental stuff. But so I think there was enough space to move things through, but you couldn't get them in those good spots. Then we invited another project in bars, which is the different shape that the same parts of the match body. The near part large enough to be able to put the internet in the parts. But that's interesting in the people. And are you guys developing further, like now that you've got this kind of community awareness of or is there like another trajectory or something? Because I just think like in terms of the municipality, I think like in terms of the levels of integration and the budget that they have, I don't see like we kind of accept that like they may never catch up in infrastructure and then be this kind of principal role in this infrastructure like it's going to be private space. And yeah, I'm just wondering